But speaking of the animal soul, so just to summarize and recap here quickly before we conclude, maybe we'll conclude chapter 9 today here and opening the Tanya. But indeed, we've been speaking about the animal soul and how that lies at the very core of our inner struggle, because the animal soul wants to be animalistic. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with being animalistic. Like the example you used at the top of page 244 of a person who's singing to God, who's a chazan, who's a cantor. Maybe you're singing for your own pride. Maybe you're singing for your own compliments. People will say, oh, you sound like Pavarotti. All of that comes from the animal soul that's very self-oriented, ego-oriented. So even neutral activities can come from the animal soul. And really the goal of man is to transform his experience in the three realms that we live in, right? The realms that he's been speaking about, thought, speech, and action, into not just an animalistic experience, but quite the opposite, a divine experience. So that everything is channeled towards God. I don't do things for me, my ego, my selfishness, my pride, my compliments, like the Chazan example. I do this for God. When I think thoughts for God that are altruistic. When I speak, I ensure that the speech is guided by divine principle. And that speaks of Lashon Hara, gossip, but it also speaks about how effective will my speech be. And sometimes the best speech is silence. And then when I act, also, I have to ask myself, am I doing what I'm about to do in honor of myself or in honor of God? Is this going to bring blessing to the world? And is this going to be an elevated deed or not? So in these three realms, those are the constant ideas we should have that really channel us into godly beings and not animalistic beings, right? And that's really the basis of chapter 9. But he ends chapter 9, I don't know if you got to this, but he ends chapter 9 with something that is quite fascinating and at the same time, I would say, stimulating. And that's the parable of the harlot and the holy czar that we'll get to. But let's go to middle of page 244, right, Margot?
Yes.
Okay. So here the author touches on a deeper point. Let's go. Does anyone want to read?
No, we're at the paragraph after that.
Oh, a soul on its own?
Correct.
Okay, so let's go there. Who wants to read there? The soul on its own, the nudity of the body. Anyone?
I'll read.
And by the way, I think the next paragraph answers your question, Margot, but go ahead.
Okay, good. A soul on its own, denuded of the body in the accoutrements of physical life, is a holy being, but it is also a static being because it has nothing to overcome. Some Hasidic masters would often say that if God had merely desired love or the study of Torah, he would have created a few million angels to love God and sit and study. But because there is no challenge in this, he does not desire it. Angels are static. They are what they are and do not change. They are therefore called omdim, those who stand. The pure soul is likewise static in order that it be truly desirable to God. In order that its service of God should be significant, it requires a challenge, and the animal soul provides this challenge. So the animal soul in its primal state is not evil in the destructive and negative sense, but a challenge that arises from the duality of human nature and from the possibility of free will, a kind of challenge that enables a person to achieve what even the pure soul cannot achieve.
Right, there goes your answer. And by the way, what this also means is that the animal soul therefore should not be rejected. And moreover, I know many people, and sometimes it's part of the school of Musar, that say that the animal soul is the worst thing that has happened to a human being. And therefore, if a person experiences the animal soul, he should fall into depression because he still hasn't refined himself. You are animalistic because you have an animal soul. And people become very bitter and depressed because they have this challenge. And yet the Tanya turns things on their face completely and says, no, you should celebrate the fact that you have an animal soul. Why? Because it's what makes you grow. It's what makes you different than an angel. An angel stands. An angel is static. An angel is boring. An angel doesn't create elevation, doesn't transform this world. You have the opportunity to do so because of this animal soul. You have the opportunity to not just be static and stand, but we are called, the flip side of that verse, by the way, Rabbi Stein's quotes here, is that that we are called people that walk between those who stand. Those who stand are the angels. We can walk. What makes us walk? What's the engine of our walk? The animal soul. So we should celebrate the animal soul. Of course, we should use it as a springboard for growth, but we shouldn't, God forbid, become depressed because we have it or because we sense it. It's actually what makes us grow. Just like anything in life, I think the things that make us grow are the challenging things. Think about your lives. The points in which you grew the most were points where you were challenged. And that's just a way of life. That's true for our inner making. The animal soul is really what makes the divine soul grow. You know, Rabbi Steiners would often use this brilliant example. If you think about this, because people pay thousands, if not tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars for paintings. Paintings, let's say a Claude Monet, is usually, you know, it's an impressionist painting that reflects nature. Sometimes that can go for millions of dollars. But you can take the exact same scenery of nature and take a picture of it. And the picture will be much more accurate. Yet that picture that can maybe be transformed into an angrodized picture with a nice frame will sell only for a few dollars. Yet the exact same reflection of nature by Claude Monet, which is by far much more inaccurate, will sell for millions of dollars. How come a painting sells for millions of dollars and a picture sells for just a few dollars? And Rabbi Shams would often answer, in order to explain what we're studying here, is that no, the picture is static. Picture is boring. Picture doesn't involve the emotion, the challenge, the passion, the full heart of the photographer. And therefore, it goes for only a few dollars. When you look at a painting, even though it's inaccurate, yeah, you see the drama of the human soul. And in that drama, you have value. And thus, it sells for millions of dollars. And that's true for the human experience altogether. Specifically, the animal soul is what increases our value by so much. And that is because, again, it enables us to grow. Person who can overcome his animal soul, or even better, as the Tanya calls it, ithapcha, can transform his animal soul, is a person that will reach heights that no angel can reach. And that is really the secret of it all. So we should celebrate our animal soul because it is what makes us grow. Powerful idea.
Very.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, if we want to expand the idea, it's true not just for the animal soul, it's true for challenges of life altogether. Not that we welcome challenges. We ask in our prayer every day, we ask God to take away those challenges. We don't want any challenges. That's how we begin the day. In the morning prayers, we say, God, that God, please save me today and every single day from minisayon, mibizayon, from any trials, from any humiliation, from all these bad things. But when they do come, not that we again welcome them and we wish them on anybody, certainly not on ourselves. But if they do come and when they do come, we should know that they are there to make us grow. And I think, by the way, if we want to expound a little bit on the upcoming festival of Pesach, because it's coming up on Wednesday night, but I think that's really what Pesach is all about. It's about finally the Jews saying to themselves that we are willing to face the animal soul, the personal one and the collective one, in the eyes, to look at it in the eyes and use it to make us grow. Where do we see that the most? Interesting, yesterday, I'm not going to deviate too much and I don't want to be monologuing also. I want to hear from you, but I'll try to condense this idea. But yesterday we celebrated what was called across the world the Shabbat HaGadol. The Shabbat before the festival of Pesach is called the Great Shabbat, Shabbat HaGadol. Why is it called the Great Shabbat? there are many answers to that, but one of the commentaries explains that it's called the Great Shabbat because of the great miracle that happened on that Shabbat. What was the great miracle? The great miracle was that before the Jews left Egypt, they were asked by God to take a sheep and tie it to their beds. Each home had to have one sheep. And eventually that sheep had to be kept for 3 days. And after 3 days, they had to sacrifice it. And that became the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach. Now, the great miracle was that the sheep was the god of the Egyptians. And when the Egyptians saw the Jews taking these sheep, they could have launched a mass pogrom. After all, they were taking their own gods. The sheep, again, were the gods of the Egyptians. And they were the masters. They could have easily told their slaves, hey, if you don't get rid of the sheep immediately, we'll kill you. But they didn't. And that was the great miracle, according to some commentaries, that the Jews acted defiantly and the Egyptians remained silent, even though they could have launched this pogrom and would have logically. That was the great miracle. So the big question is, why is this called the great miracle? I could think of other miracles that were greater, like the splitting of the Red Sea, like one of the 10 plagues. Why is this celebrated more than other miracles? Why is this Shabbat called the Great Shabbat after this great miracle? There are many other great miracles. And the answer is this. The difference between this miracle and all other miracles is that in this miracle, the Jews stood up for themselves. It's not about what happened to the Egyptians from God himself. It's about what happened to the Jews, right? It's not about what the Jews or the Egyptians did not do. It's about what the Jews did do. The Jews stood up for themselves for the first time. A nation of slaves that were in slavery now for 210 years. For the first time, they stand up for their own principle. God tells them, take a sheep, they take it. And they're unafraid. That's a great miracle. That's greater than even the splitting of the Red Sea, because the other miracles happened by God. The Jews had no say in it. Yeah, the Jews did something to stand up for themselves. And when you do something to stand up for yourself, then you deserve freedom. Then you deserve growth. And I think that's the story of the animal soul versus the godly soul. The animal soul tests us to see if we can stand up for the divine soul. Without the animal soul testing us, we would have nothing to stand for. There would be no trial. And therefore, we wouldn't need to take a stance. But the animal soul forces us to take a stance. And when
there's a problem with the animal souls. And the problem is that on the one hand, it could challenge us to do better. But on the other hand, for most, I would say for most, it leads us in the other direction.
Right.
That's the problem with the animal soul.
But if I may, that's the world. I mean, Hashem never needed to create the world. He created the world for this purpose specifically. I mean, the world produces the most beautiful fruits, the most beautiful, incredible view screen. You have the Grand Canyon, these incredible parts of the world, and then go swimming in this amazing ocean, and this gigantic swell can pull you up and strike you down. I mean, the world's a very, very complicated place, and your soul is a very, very, very much a reflection of the world itself. That's the struggle in the beauty and the harshness. We have to overcome the harshness to create the greatest, our greatest heights. Just create our wonders out of horror. Basically, you have the potential for horror and the potential for ultimate beauty, and that's our job in every moment, in every single second of our lives.
Right. Yeah, and you're right, though, William. That yes, the flip side of this is that if we fail and we are sucked in to the lure of the seduction of the animal soul, then yeah, we lose that battle. But we can rise up and fight it again, and that's really what makes us grow, and that's what makes a Claude Monet so expensive versus a photography.
But history has proven that we're not going in the right direction.
Well, yeah. No, you're right, but that's where we each have to own it, right? We can talk about history and great nations and so on, but I think at the end of the day, it's about the individual story and how each and every one of us has that animal soul to overcome. And hopefully, if each and every one of us can overcome that animal soul, then the collective story can change. But I have to mention, since it comes to mind, but just a few weeks ago, our community lost a very precious child, the son of Nir and Michelle Chop. I don't know if any one of you knows that family, but they had a son by the name of Amir Yoel, who was born with tremendous disabilities. He could not walk, he could not talk, he was legally blind, yet they nurtured him with unconditional love and care for the full 23 plus years. He was almost 24 when he passed, that he lived. And each time a person would visit, including myself, visit Amir Yoel, you thought you came to inspire, and without using any cliches, you came out inspired much more. And you ask yourself, you come and visit this man who's completely, this boy, who's completely disabled, can barely talk to you, all can do is shout, and you come out so inspired. And I think, and the question is, how does that happen? And I think at the core of it, the answer is because when you come and see a person like that, that has all these disabilities, yet every single day wakes up in the morning and chooses to live, there is nothing more inspirational than that. Why? Because that's the epitome of the struggle between the godly soul and the animal soul, the epitome of the one's ability to overcome his or her challenge, regardless of how big they are, and create a Claude Monet out of it, to use our parable. He had all the reasons to wake up in the morning and say, I want to die. But this Amir Yoel fought and fought and fought with tremendous resilience and perseverance. And thus you came out inspired, even though you saw all of these incredible challenges, unfathomable challenges that he faced. And I think that's the idea here, that when we are able to overcome our animal soul day in and day out, because it's an eternal struggle. No one fully overcomes it and banishes his animal soul. I mean, maybe the righteous do. They transform it. But no one really can reach that level. So it's a daily struggle. But when we do that, then the beauty and the inspiration that emerge from that is priceless, just priceless. And that's where really human life emerges in its full glory. But you're right, William. It's a struggle. It's a struggle, and very often people fall and but we have to, they say Sheva Yipol Tzaddik. King David says in the book of Psalms, Sheva Yipol Tzaddik v'kam, that a righteous man falls 7 times. But the difference between him and the wicked is that even though he may fall 7 times, every single time he rises again. While Rasha Yipol be'echat, the wicked falls even after just one fall. And he falls, his fall makes him lie down forever. Doesn't rise up. Okay.
Rabbi,
yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi.
Please, Amy. Hi.
Yes, hi. Oftentimes when you have challenges, for lack of a better word, they're lumped together, layered on top of each other in a small period of time. And other times you have challenges, or you may have a singular challenge. Can you help me to understand why so often challenges are often clumped together?
Yeah, well, as they say, when it rains, it pours.
Right, exactly.
Right. But you know what follows a storm?
Beauty.
The sunshine.
Right.
So when it rains, it pours, but then the sun comes and shines. Why? I don't know. I don't think anyone can answer that question. Why God brings upon troubles upon human beings that are just beyond imagination. I don't know. And sometimes really, I mean, I see people suffering and you say to yourself, gosh, God, stop. That's too much. Shouting. In the words of King David, King David is the one, by the way. It's interesting to note because John Adams is called the Book of Psalms. I forget the exact words, but he called the Book of Psalms as the most beautiful book he's ever read. but he said that in a very poetic way. I have to find the quote. But maybe because King David is the one who really suffered so much. He had trial after trial after trial, and when it rained for him, it poured. It really poured. And at one point, he says to God, "Stop! I can't understand why this is happening." He says, "Ad matai," he uses those two words very often. Until when? Until when? So I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think anyone knows. And I don't really want to say what I'm about to say, but based on what we're saying here, maybe when it rains and it pours, it's an extra dosage that will lift us up even higher thereafter. Right? The springboard is even more ready to create a higher spring. But I really don't know. It's the question of questions. And all we can do is protest it and say to God, it's enough. Kuma Ezrat Lanu, V'teinu Leman Chazdecha, as King David shouts out. And I think Psalm 73, maybe. God, it's enough. Until when are we going to be led as sheep to slaughter? Stand up already, wake up. Why are you sleeping? Come and finally show us your redemption. I think that's the only way really to react to the pouring. To understand it, I think, is beyond the capability of a finite being. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I will say what the Hasidic masters would say, that that's the fine line between seeing yourself suffer and seeing other people suffer. When you see yourself suffer, you have to examine your ways, as the Talmud says. You have to say, why is this happening to me? Is there something in my life that I need to rectify? Yefashfesh b'ma'asav, in the words of the Talmud. You should examine your actions. But when you see another person suffer, you don't know what his actions are. We don't know half of the story of what we see on the outside. And therefore, the only reaction to other people suffering is to shout and protest. For us, we can't always protest because we know that sometimes we have things to rectify. And when we see suffering on the outside, whether it's raining or pouring, we have to protest. The main difference. By the way, I just want to continue on the thought of the Talmud, that if a person has examined his ways and he still has found nothing, he still can't understand why he's suffering, then he has to accept the suffering, which is a very, very paradoxical statement. He has to accept the suffering as elu yisurin shel ahava. This is suffering of love. It's almost God saying, I love you, so here's a little patch. Evoking the words of the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, who asked a good question, because if you look at the punishment of the snake, the beginning of creation, when he seduced Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden tree, his punishment seems to be a reward. His punishment was, I'll cut your feet off and you'll be able to crawl across the world, or crawl wherever you are, and you'll eat dust your entire life. Isn't that a reward? The Kotzker Rebbe asked. After all, you're telling the snake that he won't have to work for his livelihood. He'll have his food ready for him at all times. That's what he eats, dust. There's dust everywhere. It's a reward. It's not a punishment. And the Kotzker Rebbe would say, no, that's the ultimate punishment. Because when God tells a creature, I'll give you whatever you want, just leave me alone, I don't want a relationship with you, that's the greatest punishment one can get. And sometimes suffering is God saying, I want a relationship with you. I love you. But anyway, we should know of no suffering whatsoever, especially during this month, which is the month of miracles. The name of the month, Nisan, means miracles. And the Talmud states also, just as in this month we were redeemed, so too in this month we will be redeemed. Mashiach will come. And it's enough for God to send any type of suffering to us as individuals, or to us as collectives. And may indeed it be a month of the ultimate miracle in which we see the coming of Mashiach and experience really only goodness and kindness forever.